Welcome, brothers and sisters, friends, family, and comrades. I'm Jeff Grabelski. I am a member of the faculty of the Worker Institute here at Cornell University and the co-founder and co-director of the National Labor Leadership Initiative. Welcome to the second of 3 webinars in our series on leading in a time of crisis, building personal, organizational, and movement resilience. These 3 webinars follow the 3 domains of leadership around which the NLLI is structured: personal mastery, organizational change and transformation, and movement building. And this afternoon, we'll be focusing on organizational resilience. Like many of you, I sometimes feel a bit zoomed out. And while some Zoom meetings add to my sense of Zoom fatigue, every remote gathering of NLLI leaders inspires and energizes me, and I thank you for that. I hope you and your loved ones are safe and healthy today, and for those of you who have suffered losses in your families, in your organizations, in your communities, on behalf of our NLLI team, I extend my deep love and support. I mentioned that this is the second of the 3 webinars in this series. The first webinar we conducted 2 weeks ago, it focused on building personal resilience in a time of crisis. It was led by Kathleen Mulligan Hansel and included 3 great leaders, Nicole Corkelis from OPIU, Hanad Mohammed from the Solidarity Center, and Felicia Griffin from the Partnership for Working Families. This afternoon for our second webinar, Building Organizational Resilience in a Time of Crisis, that's where we are now. We have 3 other great NLLI leaders who will be presenting: Karen White from the National Education Association, and Jimmy Williams Jr. from the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, and Nia Winston from Unite HERE. And then in a couple of weeks, we will have the third of the 3 webinars, which is Building Movement Resilience in a Time of Crisis, and that we hope to do in the beginning of June. So here we are. Before we go too much further, I just want to let you all know that we will be recording this webinar so that members of our NLLI community who are unable to join us this afternoon can tune back in and see a video recording of our webinar. So what are we going to be doing this afternoon? Well, here's the basic agenda. The first part of the webinar will focus on effective leadership practices in a time of crisis. I'll make a brief presentation, and then you'll have an opportunity in small groups to talk about these and other leadership practices. And then the second half of our webinar, we'll hear from some of your peers, from Karen White from the NEA, from Jimmy Williams Jr. from the IUPAT, and Nia Winston from Unite HERE. And then we'll do some reflection together on what we've heard from these leaders. Let me also just briefly review the Zoom tools that you are familiar with and that we'll be using this afternoon. One will be the mute and unmute buttons. That will be important in particular when we get into small groups. You'll have to be sure to unmute your devices. We'll be using the participant list momentarily, where you'll use the yes or no buttons. We'll be using the chat box, where you'll have an opportunity to put comments, questions, etc. And we'll be working with that shortly as well. And then we're going to be also getting into breakout rooms, where you'll have an opportunity to meet with a couple of other great leaders in our NLLI community. So first, let's just start with the participant list. And if you can go to the participant list at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a yes and no button. And so if you participated in webinar number 1, use the green yes button to indicate that. And if you didn't participate in webinar number 1, then use the red no button to indicate that. And let's just take a look and see in the participant list all of the folks who are with us today. And we can see many of you had the opportunity to participate in webinar number 1, so welcome back. And for those of you who didn't participate in webinar 1, welcome to webinar 2. Okay, let's move to the chat box. And if you'll click on the chat box, what we'd like for you to do is to respond in the chat box to this question, a good way to like test your chat box skills. What is one thing your organization has done in the last 60 days to adapt to this public health and economic crisis? So take a minute, identify just one of the many things your organization has done and put it in the chat box. And let's take a look at what we see in the chat box, and we can see the broad range of adaptive measures that your organization has taken: new forms of communication with members, new communication with staff, remote meetings, etc. We'll be talking about some of those adaptations during the course of our session this afternoon. Now, before we get started, let's also very briefly review and keep in mind some of the group norms that Kathleen shared with us in the first webinar 2 weeks ago, and let's keep them in mind for this webinar. The first, anonymity and confidentiality, is especially important because we're going to be talking very candidly about our organizations and the challenges that our organizations have been facing during this time of crisis. In addition, we want to ask for you to be as present as possible, to participate in every opportunity that we invite you to participate. Please keep your cameras on because we feel more connected when you're on the camera and with us. If you need to take a break, feel free to do that. Just come back and put the camera back on. And we want to encourage you to embrace the larger NLLI community. You'll have a chance to see and talk with many leaders who you already know, but also the opportunity to meet some leaders in the NLLI network that you haven't met yet. And we just encourage you to really connect in a deep and personal way with the leaders who have joined us for the webinar today. And finally, when we get to the point of some discussion, we may call on you. Sorry for that interruption. We may call on you, so feel free to jump in if you have something to offer, or to pass if you're not prepared to share with us at that time. So let's jump right in here. And you know, as I reflect back on webinar number one of the takeaways for me was this very profound insight that Nicole Corcolis shared with us, and she gave me permission to use it again this afternoon. She said, I don't want to experience this life-changing event without changing. Really, I think really deep to think about this moment. And it inspires a similarly important but anonymous insight about our organizations that informs the way that we have prepared for and framed the webinar this afternoon. And it's this: our organization should not go through a life-changing crisis without changing. This quote, I think, raises a question that we will be exploring together this afternoon, and that is, how does this crisis present an opportunity for organizational change? Now, you all know that the NLLI provides us with a broad range of tools and approaches to leading organizational change, and you'll remember some of them: the importance, for example, of your vision, systems thinking, the wheel of change, dealing with resistance to change, building stakeholder commitment. And what we want to do is briefly build on those tools and approaches by lifting up a few leadership practices that we think are particularly useful to being adaptive during this crisis. So in preparing for the webinar this afternoon, I went back and reread the article called Leadership in a Permanent Crisis, which we distribute for retreat number one. And I know all of you read, have committed to memory, and if not, I will refresh your memory about that article, because there's a quote in that article that I found to be particularly meaningful during this time of crisis. And it's this: crisis leadership has two distinct phases. First is that emergency phase, when your task is to stabilize the situation and buy time. And second is the adaptive phase, when you tackle the underlying causes of the crisis and build the capacity to thrive in a new reality. This is from Leadership in a Permanent Crisis. Again, crisis leadership has two distinct phases. First is that emergency phase, when your task is to stabilize the situation and buy time. Second is the adaptive phase, when you tackle the underlying causes of the crisis and build the capacity to thrive in a new reality. Now, does this ring true to you when you think about your own experience leading during this time of crisis? If you feel like you're still in that first emergency phase, just put up one finger. Okay, and if you think that you have moved through the emergency phase and you've kind of entered this adaptive phase, put up two fingers. And if it's neither or both, just put up a fist. Okay, I can see that many of you are in different places and different phases in dealing with this crisis. And as we move through these two phases and other phases of the crisis, I'd like to offer 6 leadership practices that can be particularly useful in dealing with the crisis. And these practices are precisely the things that many of you, including the 3 presenters this afternoon, Karen, Jimmy, and Nia, have been deploying. And so I really learned these from you in the conversations I've had with many of you as leaders and conversations with our 3 presenters. And what I'm doing is really bringing them back to you. I'm going to make some brief comments about each of these 6 leadership practices. And then you'll have an opportunity in triads, in groups of 3, to talk about the relevance of these and other leadership practices in dealing with the challenges that you face, the value of these practices in the midst of this crisis. So let's take a look at these 6 leadership practices. Practice number 1. Lead with your vision and values, or with your values and vision, as you stabilize your organization. Lead with your values and vision as you stabilize your organization. So this crisis has just been catastrophic for our organizations, for our communities, for many of our families. And so many of you have worked so tirelessly to address the immediate emergency, supporting your members in distress, dealing with your organization's staff and resources, finances, basic functions. And that's like, that response is absolutely essential to, at the outset of an emergency like this. But in the turbulent waters of this crisis, it's easy for us to become consumed by the emergency and really feel disoriented without a kind of beacon to find our way through this storm. And I just want to suggest, because it's one of the things that we work on a lot in the NLLI, that our values and vision provide that beacon. So I think in a time of crisis, leading with our values and vision is more important than ever. That's number 1. Okay, leadership practice number 2 really speaks to kind of the second phase of crisis leadership, because dealing with the immediate emergency is essential, but it represents like one step in this process. And the second leadership practice is to seek opportunities to reshape your organization for a different future, conserving what works, abandoning what did not work, and experimenting with practices that were not previously possible. So many of you, including the 3 presenters, Karen, Jimmy, and Nia, have been exercising this leadership practice in some really amazing ways. And you're going to hear some great examples of this kind of experimentation. You've been forced to do things differently. And clearly, some of the things that you're doing now, you may abandon when the crisis subsides. But some of the new and innovative practices that you've implemented during the crisis, maybe you want to retain after the crisis because you've discovered they're useful. And so this is just recognizing that a crisis like this creates an opportunity to experiment and to try things that before the crisis were deemed impossible in your organization. And I know from the 3 leaders who are going to present, there are some things they're doing that 6 months ago, were kind of unimaginable within their organizations. Okay, leadership practice number 3 to consider is to embrace disequilibrium and uncertainty while conveying confidence and hope. So despite the fact that the title of our webinar suggests that we want to maintain equilibrium, it's also important for each of us to acknowledge that one of the defining characteristics of this historic crisis is the disequilibrium and uncertainty that has enveloped our lives. And clearly, like leaders, always have to be comfortable with ambiguity. and to be able to like hold seemingly contradictory truths in their head at the same time. That's like the polarities that we talked about in the NLLI. But in the midst of this crisis, when people feel a totally understandable need for reassurance and stability and certainty, we may be tempted to kind of offer a false sense of security and certainty that actually further destabilizes and demoralizes people when the false promises that we might be like offering are revealed to be just that. And let me just say, like, we have witnessed that kind of horribly flawed leadership every friggin' day in the White House. Like, you can see how to lead in a crisis by seeing in some ways how not to lead. I mean, trust is the currency of leadership, and it can be very easily squandered if we don't honestly share our own struggle that we all feel in accepting that we can't fully control all these events that are swirling around us. And I think it's good to share that, to like accept that. But also to remember that the disequilibrium in this crisis is not just a bad thing, that it also is what offers the opportunity for the kind of experimentation that many of you are engaged in. So like in the midst of the crisis, it's harder, but it's also more important than ever to both hold on to that uncertainty, but also project a sense of hope and confidence about the future. Okay, leadership practice number 4. Promote a culture of courageous conversations, more open communications, and truth-telling. Each of our panelists this afternoon will share some very, very innovative ways that they have communicated with their staffs, with their members, with the community, with the public. But it's not just the techniques of communication that matter, it's also the quality of the communication. I mean, there's a reason why, you know, Anthony Fauci is one of the most trusted people in the United States. You know, like really think about kind of the nature of that communication. And on the flip side of that, again, Trump's outrageous behavior in dispensing misinformation and outright lies demonstrates how not engaging in truth-telling really exacerbates the crisis. It drives up a sense of anxiety and it reinforces a disorientation that people feel. So I'm just saying that the tools of communication that we learn together in the NLLI, like deep listening and courageous conversations, they can really hold us in good stead in the midst of a crisis of this kind. Let me say, incidentally, that each of these 6 practices were in the slides that we sent out to everyone who registered, and they'll also appear in the chat box, so you'll be able to refer back to these. Okay, so practice number 5. Generate and support distributive and diverse leadership. So in a time of crisis like this, I think some leaders may be tempted to kind of hunker down and to kind of rely really heavily on a command and control approach and hold their positional power really tightly. And I would say that given all the uncertainty that we face in a situation like this, that's kind of a risky approach, because no one, including any one of us who think of ourselves as a leader, no one has all or even any good answers to a lot of unanswerable questions that are out there. And so by generating broader and more diverse leadership in the organization, we can engage more minds and more perspectives to get more input and more creative ideas. And because the crisis creates an opportunity to experiment, it's really important for us to remember that all the new initiatives in your organization are not going to come from you, or from headquarters for that matter. And you're going to hear that in the presentations that the 3 leaders will share with us, that many of the new initiatives in your organization will come from the accumulation of all kinds of innovations and micro adaptations that are taking place throughout the organization where new leaders are leading. And so I would just say, like, embrace that, support that, encourage that leadership. This is a time when new leaders will emerge, and it's a great opportunity to build that leadership. Okay, so finally, let me conclude with these leadership practices with the 6th leadership practice. And I'm really concluding where Kathleen began in webinar number 1, and that is take care of yourself as you take care of others. You know, it was really clear, and I think this is, you know, what we learned in that webinar, that leaders can't take care of their teams or their staffs or their members unless they take care of themselves. And frankly, we can't expect others to take care of themselves if we don't model for them how we're taking care of ourselves. So I would just say, do everything Kathleen taught us, all right? Just follow her instructions. But seriously, you know, like really think about that. And for example, I'd encourage you to participate in the weekly meditations that Kathleen does every Thursday morning at 10 a.m. She did one this morning. And believe me, they help. So there's a way for us to take care of ourselves. Okay, let me stop there. I know I went through these pretty quickly. I just want to kind of get them out there before we're going to get into smaller groups. But I've identified these 6. They're not the only 6 leadership practices in crisis, but a good reminder of the things that we've learned together: to lead with our values and vision as we stabilize the organization, to experiment, to reshape the organization for a different future, to embrace uncertainty and convey confidence and hope, to promote courageous conversations and open communications and truth-telling, to generate and support distributive and diverse leadership, and to take care of yourselves as you take care of others. So all of those practices are going to be put into the chat box by Christine. So you'll see them there. They're there now. And incidentally, I can't remember if I mentioned this, but if you have any technical problems during the webinar and you need some help, Christine has also been kind enough to put her cell phone number in the chat box, and she's putting it in again now. You can text or call her if you have any difficulty, and she will be able, hopefully, to help solve whatever problems we might encounter. Okay, so what we want to do is an exercise where we're going to break up into small groups. You're going to be in a group with 2 other leaders, and you're going to have about 15 minutes in your group to share with one another. And here are the questions that we would like for you to explore. These will also be in the chat box. So really 2 questions to talk about with the other 2 leaders that you'll be meeting with now. The first is, which of these and other leadership practices are or could be helpful for my organization? Why and how? Like, to just really reflect on these. And secondly, which 1 or 2 of these leadership practices am I using or will I implement? Like, oh yeah, I'm not thinking about that enough. I'm going to try to implement that in order to lead more effectively in this crisis. These questions are also going to be in the chat box, so you can refer back to them. So here's how this is going to work. In a moment, you're going to get an invitation to join the breakout group. It's like a breakout room that you'll go into. And you have to click on that invitation in order to get into the breakout room. So make sure you say, yes, I want to talk with, you know, 2 other great leaders in our community. Before you go into the breakout room, unmute your devices. I think especially if you're on a phone or something, because you want to be unmuted when you go into the breakout room to be sure that you can be heard, because we want you to be heard when you're talking with your colleagues. And then we will send you reminders, like we'll say, you know, it's like 5 minutes left or 2 minutes left. And then at the end of the time, you'll automatically come back into this full group. So is it clear what's about to happen? You're going to get an invitation to go into a small group, unmute your device, click, yes, I want to go there, and then spend 15 minutes talking about these 2 questions, which appear in your chat box. And we're going to invite you to go into your breakout rooms now.
Hi.
Welcome
Hello.
back, everyone.
Hello.
How did I get, well, I guess I'm in both groups.
We're all back now.
Whatever, but we're all back together now. And I'm in a view where I can see more of you, and it's so great to see you.
I know, it's fabulous.
So great to see you all. So we want to take a few minutes to just reflect a little bit on the conversation that you just had. How were those conversations? Like, give me a thumbs up if that was like, yeah, it was really good to be able to talk with some other leaders about these questions. Don't be shy. Get those thumbs up. Let's see what you think. All right. Great. So I'd just like to hear a little bit about whatever insights you came up with in your triads in those conversations. And there are a couple different ways that you can share them with the group. One is you can just like type them into the chat box and you can see the insights that are coming in. That's one thing you can do. You can also, in the participant list, there are, if you press more, there's a place where you can, let's see, where do you raise your hand? I'm trying to find that.
It's all the way to the left, usually next to the yes, no buttons.
Yeah, you had to hit the 3 dots.
Yeah, mine's not showing up. But if you go to the 3 dots, you should see a raising your hand. Or actually, you can raise your hand. we can look and see if we can see you. But would anyone like to offer any insights, observations from their conversation? And Kathleen, please feel free to like jump in as you see insights that are rolling in the chat box as well. So would someone like to share what they heard?
I will. Hey, everybody. We had a great chat, and I think probably one of the things I pulled out most of it was the sort of hopefulness of like finding silver linings, right? Accepting where we are and the uncertainty of all the things, but the peace around, for me and the other folks in my group, we talked about, that this is actually an opportunity, right? And how can we use that opportunity to better our organizations, better ourselves as leaders, better the world, whatever, right? That kind of opportunity. So that was, I was glad to see, I hear other people are feeling that way also.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. Anyone else want to share?
Can you get Andrea
there's a couple good
Walker?
ones in the chat. Go ahead.
Yeah, Andrea, can you talk about what you put in the chat?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so one of the leadership qualities was around kind of transforming the future, something like that. And we talk about this time as being an opportunity for inventing the future in new and brave, fabulous ways. And once life returns to a place of increased safety where we can go out again, avoiding the temptation to just go back to what we knew and practice those same old behaviors and actions. And so how do we live into what we talk about wanting to do?
Great. Thanks, Andrea.
Yeah.
And there were a few that spoke to that question of adapting and not going back to like the pre-pandemic normal. And that feels to me like such an important approach to recognize that the pre-pandemic normal in the larger world didn't work. And in some respects, it didn't work for us internally. And how might we use this opportunity to adapt? Anyone else want to share a little bit?
How about Linda? I'm just calling on people who have an interesting comment in the chat box. Instead of me reading your comment, maybe you can just share it.
Go ahead, Linda. What are you doing out in San Francisco?
Linda, you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself.
You got to unmute yourself first. Linda, you have to unmute yourself. Maybe I can, yeah.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Use this background because I have a mess behind me right now. But we use the diversified leadership because what we found out was in our local, 5,000 of our members work for healthcare, and another 1,000 or 1,500 are in the transportation unions. So we had people on the front lines all over the place, and we needed to grow leadership within our shops, not just within our local, and we reorganized the way our shops were dispersed and really empowered people to make decisions. But we created frontline leaders where we had 8 of them. We pulled off the clock, full-time pay. They were boots on the ground. They were helping us deal with catastrophes that were going on in the medical centers in real time. They were able to participate and negotiate with management over PPE, critical issues, things that we might be handling. So we actually saw our steward structure just organically spring up leaders, where if we were having mask PPE problems with masks or something, and they were fake masks, because we had a lot of that coming in all over the United States. Our stewards learned how to spot that. So they were able to do spot reviews in all of the shops to see where people were getting appropriate equipment, things like this. So I think for us, it was really watching the membership grow. It was really empowering the frontline leaders, and it was giving them the room to do what they needed to do and getting them the time.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, how are you?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Linda. Kathleen, it looked like you were about to call on someone else. And I just want to pause before we do that, because I also want to be sure that we have time to hear from and talk about the experiences that Karen and Jimmy and Nia will share. So Kathleen, what do you think? Should we shift to hear from our presenters, and then maybe these other comments can come up further along? Okay, that's great. So I'm going to just be really quick to introduce our speakers. We're going to first hear from Karen White from the National Education Association, then Jimmy Williams Jr. from the Painters and Allied Trades, and then Nia Winston from Unite HERE. I won't say much by way of introduction, except that these are wonderful leaders who are part of our community and have been doing some amazing work and have given so much back to our community. We really appreciate it. And the questions that I asked for them to think a little bit about and share are, one, like, given the challenges that they're facing in the middle of this crisis, how have the learnings of the NLLI helped them lead effectively during this time? One. Two, like, what are some of the things that their unions have been able to do during the crisis that are really new and different? And three, like, what are some things that they think their organization should be doing that they're not yet ready to do and they're kind of struggling with it, or any other issues they want to share with us? They're going to talk only for like 7 or 8 minutes each, so we have some time to process what we've heard. So first, Karen White, and you might want to put your speaker, the view from gallery to speaker view to fully see that Karen got dressed today.
Oh, you had to tell everyone, Joe.
Yeah, I won't say what you really said. Here's our dear friend, Karen White.
It's great to be with everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I really, really do appreciate being able to see all of the NLLI family. And I know for many of you, as it does for me, being in this family has really made such a difference for me, both personally and professionally, and even more so during this major health crisis. You know, whether it's joining Kathleen's weekly Zoom meditation, mindfulness Zooms, which have been great, or doing some peer coaching with some of my NLLI friends, or the happy hour that we had with the Quints last month. NLLI 5 is the class. So, you know, it's just really helped ground me in my leadership and doing what's best, not only for my organization and the movement, but also for myself personally. So I am really grateful and just want everybody to know that. As we all know, anyone can lead when the plan is working, but the best lead when the plan falls apart. And I don't know about all of you, but all the plans that we had and were ready to move on in February and early March kind of fell apart on us. And it was really important for my training through the NLLI curriculum. I really did kind of pull back into the mindfulness practices and really pausing and thinking about what we were doing before we acted. I know many of us they want to jump right in and just kind of get going and fix things and make things right for our members and for our colleagues. But none of us have been through this before. And anybody that says they have, I think they're just not telling you the truth. And we need to act decisively and provide leadership, but we also need to be really clear in our own minds, and spending that time to reflect and understand where we're trying to go is important. One of the things I've been saying to our staff is that we have to listen with our ears and with our hearts. That's kind of been my mantra throughout this, because we don't know what people are going through, and some people are very private and don't want to share that. So listening with your heart is just as important as listening with your head. And leading with vision. When Jeff called and asked me to do this was part of the conversation that we had, is that, you know, there's a lot to do every single day, a lot of fires to put out. And I know we all feel like we're drinking from that fire hose, but we also have to keep our eyes on the horizon, and kind of going through those vision exercises in the NLLI program really helped me do that, and is continuing to help me even though there are the daily fires to put out, but what are the things that we have to be ready for 6, 12, and 18 months down the road, keeping our eye on that horizon. I did recall back during week 3, you all remember examining the movement versus the organization. This is a movement for sure. And, you know, it might have started with the moment, but it has turned into a movement. And it is absolutely laid bare the inequities that have already existed in our society, in our country, in our nation, in our world. But it is now even more prominent, at least from the education field. We are seeing, you know, some teachers haven't seen their kids in 8 weeks because they can't get online. They don't have the technology or the broadband, and they're going to their houses and knocking on doors and not finding the kids where they hoped they would be. And people are really struggling with that. I mean, our members miss their kids so much. You know, they're driving around in caravans, as you've seen I'm sure on Facebook. We have some members that have donated $300 out of their stimulus check to give to undocumented workers who don't have access to that kind of help through our government. It's a program through Jobs with Justice that, you know, has been really helpful. So a lot of us have been working through that. And it's always, you know, you want to, the movement, you want to be in the movement because it's the sexier thing. But you can see my Red for Ed stuff in the background, but the organization's role is just as powerful, and really working to sustain those changes and set up the structures that will help us construct the systems that we need for change. And some of us have just been thrown into it, right? I mean, there are a lot of things that we were planning to do, and we're now completely changing how we're doing that. So I would say that, you know, we've been able to do a lot of things new and different. One of the things that we have done is we're reaching our members in new ways to really provide that connectedness. And some people, we talked in my group through Hustle, but it also is through teletown halls and webinars, and sometimes even as, you know, old school as direct mail. And just some of it's just a health check to make sure that our members are okay and see if they need anything from their local, their national, or their state organization. Obviously using the technology to improve, you know, we'd always wanted to move to a more broader digital strategy. Well, the world dragged us into that much quicker than we would ever have gotten there had we not been in this national health crisis. And our workforce, we had to change it really quickly. We have over 500 employees at the national level, at the state and local level. When you combine all that, we probably have over 5,000 employees, but we had to quickly focus on the priorities rather than continuing to do business as usual. And so what are the needs of our members? What were the needs of their students and their families? Checking in on our affiliate health, our fiscal health of our affiliates, because we're only as strong or as weak as our partners. And then the election of 2020, which, as Jeff said, you know, earlier, if we don't get new leadership in this country, we are going to be in some more serious trouble than we already are now. So those are really our 4 priorities that we continue to focus on. And I'll tell you, we're learning the value of a virtual workforce really quickly. We had a colleague of mine, Sabrina Tynes, who went through the NEA LLI. That was my personal project, was to bring Nilly into NEA, and it was just fabulous, and we're looking forward to continuing it. But her project was to make our annual meeting go virtual. And we all laughed at her and said that will never happen. And here we are. Now we have an annual meeting with 10,000 members. We were supposed to meet in Atlanta. We made this is an annual meeting. The members of the National Education Association do the business of our organization. It is the largest democratic governing body in the world. And we are now going to do it online. And it's very complicated. We have officer elections, but they're getting, it's kind of incredible that Sabrina had this as a project and now we're moving into it. So, you know, we're gonna see how that works, but most people at NEA, our president, for example, Lily Eskelsen Garcia, who's getting ready to retire, she has been to 38 RAs, 38. I mean, we have only had 1 cancellation in 1945, and folks can imagine what that was about, since 1857 when our organization originated. So this is really historic for us to be able to move this to an online venue, and we'll see how it turns out. We're hoping to engage a much larger portion of our membership, and we're hoping to engage them in ways that are different so that we can make sure that we're keeping that connectedness, and that our members are acting as one strong union, which we know is really going to be the key to it. There are some things that I wish we were doing differently. I'll be very honest. We talk to ourselves too much. That's why being with you all today is so lovely for me. It'll be the best part of my month, because we talk to ourselves a lot, and we are in a lot of meetings and planning, and I really wish we could go beyond our own infrastructure and really join up with others in a more powerful way. We're doing that with our states and with our locals, but I would love to do that more with external organizations. In the short term, we're focusing on the, how do we really right these inequities and preserve jobs and make sure that students and schools have what they need, and what the government's commitment is to our public sector workers. And so we're pushing for $175 billion out of this next stimulus, which I know is going to be really difficult, but we've already had literally 187,000 letters and emails to Congress in the last 48 hours. So people are really on top of it. But we know in the long term, and we have to keep our eye on that ball, is that it's about voice. It's about what matters to students, and it's about educators having the influence in the decision-making process, because we know that they see the inequities every single day. Some schools don't have, for example, as we think about coming back to school, they don't have isolation rooms, right? Some schools don't have hand washing stations. So we know that some schools have everything and others have nothing. And how do we allow us to come back into schools safely in a way that is going to be safe for all kids and all educators, and not just the ones that live in those really popular zip codes? So we're trying to take this moment to ensure that we have the equity across the board with our students in every area of this country. And it is a big challenge. Fighting institutional racism has been something that we have taken on as an organization. We know that it is something that is in our DNA that we have to do. And so we're going to try to use this opportunity to figure out where those inequities can be corrected as best as we can. So I would
Karen, I'm sorry.
Yep.
You were about to conclude. I didn't mean to.
I was just going to conclude by saying my mantra, which is we have to listen with our ears and lead with our hearts.
Great. Karen, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I want to shift now to Jimmy Williams, Jr. from the IUPAT to talk about these questions from the perspective of his organization. And Jimmy, I'll jump in and give you a little warning when we're getting towards the end of your time before Nia will speak. Here's
Sure.
Jimmy.
And hopefully I won't be long-winded, Jeff. Thank you guys too. It's great to see faces that I know, but it's also such a testament to NLLI when you can meet somebody you've never met before in that little breakout group, just meeting my sister from AFSCME. It's such a testament to the program where you ultimately immediately just trust the person you're working with, and you can learn from each other. And I appreciate the time to be able to tell you our little story and how NLLI has impacted our union and has impacted myself as a leader in this moment. I would say that it's been a while for me as well. I was a member of NLLI too, and that's been every bit of about 5 years or 4 or 5 years. And for those of you who've been in the program, maybe shorter term, the habits of walking away and going back to business as usual, just getting this opportunity today to be able to reflect on the things that I've learned is pretty, it's just one of those things that make you pause and think, wow, what are we doing in this moment? And it's exciting to be able to share our little story. To the first question, NLLI has impacted our union a lot. All of the top leadership at our departments within the Painters Union have gone through one of the programs, whether it be the national group or the Mid-Atlantic or the regional groups. And I think that some of the things that the program has been able to instill in us has allowed us to quickly adapt the best we could to a situation that nobody understood what the right answers were to do. And I think in a construction union like ourselves that had already been going through some major changes to how we do our business and what our attempts to diversify were and our attempts to organize in different ways construction workers, immigrant workers, workers of color in general, low wage workers in certain aspects of our industry, and organized differently. This pandemic, I think, created such an opportunity for us to take a look at how we do our business a lot differently and how our leaders respond. Construction workers work in every sector of the economy. We're the sixth largest employment sector in the country, and we work in every sector. So we're affected by every aspect of the economy: school construction, hotels that are now shut down. We are so interconnected to every other aspect of the labor movement and the workforce in general. And we've seen our workers being put in this debate over what's essential and what's not essential. And we quickly wanted to say, we're essential, but we're not expendable. And the notion of a construction worker being put on the front lines to build a billionaire's condominium at a time where nobody had the right proper PPE or the proper way to deal with how to run an effective construction site, versus making sure we were building the critical medical infrastructure that was needed to treat a pandemic, would put our organization in a position where we didn't know what the right answer was. We didn't know if it was right to say, go to work and, keep working and we'll figure it out as we go, or if it meant stop and let's figure it out, we can get there. We had leaders step up in ways that hadn't been done before. In Boston, Massachusetts, our leader stood up and said, our members are not going to work until we have the right proper PPE. And for 3 weeks, held out every single one of our members from going to work in harm's way. And it was a moment in our union where we were able to say, wow, look at the power we have. Look at the power we have to be able to demand certain things, to be able to turn back on the economy. As we watched the debate in DC over how to respond as a government, we quickly shifted and said, we got to make sure that we demand things in here that are going to help our members. How do we do that? Well, let's put their stories first. As opposed to in the past, we would always have our leadership speaking and demanding certain things, and the culture of, as a union, this is what we want. We got member stories from people around the country about what they were going through in this pandemic, both economically and in their own personal lives. And we put those videos out on Facebook and Twitter. And we had one member, a young African-American apprentice, who was torn between being able to stay home and put her young kids through school or going to work to keep her health care. And her story got shared with almost 500,000 people just by a couple retweets by really powerful people in our country. And that story got to drive what it is we were trying to do, which is get our members to realize that our elected leadership are making major changes to our economy, making major changes to how our government responds, and that our union has to be in there fighting for our workers and all construction workers at the same time. And we couldn't have done that if we didn't give the voices to our young people who know how to use the tools. Our older leadership, they don't know how to use Facebook effectively. They don't know how to use Twitter effectively. But some of the teams that we've been working with and building, it was their time to lead. It was their time to step up. And they did. They were able to quickly turn around campaigns where we were doing Facebook events with our entire membership, fielding questions and answers, putting our leadership there to engage directly with our members. And so I think when we think about how NLLI has affected us as an organization, we were able to quickly move and lift up people. And to the last question of what is the one thing I wish we could have done differently short term, is I wish we would have had the infrastructure built in place to stop job sites that ended up killing our membership. We lost 13 members in the first 2 weeks, 6 of which were in New York City. That for sure 5 of them contracted the virus on the job. There's no way. Two of our brothers were working side by side with one another, and they both passed away working in the New York City Housing Authority. I wish we had built enough of an infrastructure to fight and demand and walk off of the job sites that weren't safe, so we could have saved our brothers' lives. That's the one thing I think we know we should have done if we had to look back a little bit more effectively and followed the lead of our leaders in Boston and other places. And so, you know, in closing, this moment and the skills that we learned from NLLI, I believe, has allowed our union to put our members first, but also to dig in and advocate for our industry and what our industry really needs at this moment of crisis, and be able to show leadership at a time when it was needed.
Great. Jimmy, thank you so much for sharing that. And as a slight quick story, when Jimmy and I were talking, we were talking about these issues, and I noticed behind him on the wall was the wheel of change on the wall. I said, oh, yeah, I guess you got that in mind. That was great.
Never left.
Thank you. And our heart goes out to you and your members and all of your members who have suffered through this pandemic. It's a terrible story, but the power that you're trying to build is essential. Let me now introduce Nia Winston from Unite HCRE. And Nia is in the current Lucky 7 NLLI program. You can see a few Lucky 7ers up there. Nia, it's all you, sister.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Hello to everyone. It's great to see some familiar faces, and also it's also great to see some of you that I have never had the pleasure of meeting until now. I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to get an opportunity to express what NLLI and how NLLI has made a difference on, you know, not just my life, but our union's life and in our organization as we work through and do more in this time of crisis. But before I say anything, I know that Karen had mentioned something about her being in group 5, and I also know Jimmy mentioned something about her group. Let's be clear to all of you guys that are on this NLLI, group 7 is Lucky 7, and it is the best group, okay? Let's just get that out the way before I keep it moving, okay? Let's be clear. Now, I'm gonna park that to the side, and then I'm gonna answer your questions, Jeff. But on the serious side, when you ask the question about, you know, NLLI and how it's helped me in my organization and leading a time of crisis, we had retreat 2 3 weeks prior to COVID-19 really being introduced, you know, in our industry and in the Midwest where I am located. And so the things that were fresh on my mind and the things that we were working on in retreat 2, you know, we talked a lot about, you know, leading organizational change, right? And what a better time to talk about leading organizational change 3 weeks prior to the time you really have to lead in organizational change through COVID-19. And so I had a leadership project, and a lot of my leadership project that I was working on, organization that I lead, and I probably would have made it through, but not necessarily would have been able to make it through and lead effectively without the tools that I learned in retreat 2. Like retreat 2 was a savior because again, it was fresh on our mind. We had just come off of NLLI. We were high off the retreat. We were working on our leadership projects, and my leadership project was no different than, you know, what we're all faced with now is like how to, you know, lead in a, you know, your organization through change. And that's something that I was working on. And so some of the things that really helped me through it all, whether it was at retreat 1 or retreat 2, you know, it was the deep listening. I'm finding myself listening to my staff more as we reach out to the leaders, listening to our workers and our leaders as they tell us what their thoughts are through all of it. Courageous conversations, whether it's telling someone something they don't want to hear. Unfortunately, maybe having to do staff layoffs through all of this. And, you know, we have 98% of our members that are not working, that are on furlough. So it was tough conversations. So, you know, that deep listening, those courageous conversations really helped me through that. But some of the things that I learned in retreat 2 that was also helpful in my leadership skills and ability, right shortly after retreat, again in March, and up to now was, developing a plan with SMART goals, right? How can you lead an effective union through organizational change of a crisis without having a plan? How, you have to have those SMART goals as well. Also the will of change, understanding the will of change. What was extremely helpful is, we talked about in retreat 2 is, building stakeholders, right? And getting them to commit. And that's been really extremely important because, it was clear to me that right when COVID-19 happened and, as a leader, you're trying to forward think of different things to do and lead and can't foresee the future and didn't know it was going to be what it is today. But it's clear that there's not everyone that understood that. There are unfortunately a lot of our workers and our leaders, and quite frankly, some of my staff just thought that, after our governors lifted her restriction in March, but that did not happen, that the world was just going to go back to normal and people were going to go back to work. And so I really had to get folks in leadership that are like mind forward thinkers to say, you know what, this is not going to happen. We have to have these courageous conversations with our membership, tell them what's going on in the industry, all of the changes that are going to be ahead of us. And I think that, I believe I could have made it, but I could not have made it the way that I was able to without retreat 2. And just that was very helpful to me. And I'm thankful that that was, again, 3.5 weeks prior to all of the crisis. So that was extremely helpful. When it comes to the things that our union is doing, like we always had like a bottom-up union and making sure we highlight our members and our leaders as something that we pride ourselves on. And so we were just able to amplify that more, whether it was trying to make sure throughout the country that folks, whose employers were not going to extend their healthcare coverage, amplifying that, employers who were taking a dig at some of the undocumented workers and highlighting those stories, workers who unfortunately have lost their lives through all of this when their employers are treating them as guinea pigs, meaning too soon to go back to work, whether, billionaires who've owned these corporations, done nothing for their workers, et cetera. And so those are some things that we were doing, just highlighting our member stories in the media. And I think I like to just say, just as a shout out to my union, I think that's something that we do extremely well when it comes to our members and our leaders in doing that. And so I was thankful that, that's not something that we had to learn. That's just something that, was just in our DNA, and that we were able to do that. And that assisted us through the process. I am aware that through all that is going on, I am thankful to have a leader, D. Taylor, our international president, because he is also a forward-thinking individual, very straightforward, and he has challenged us all to be better leaders to our members, and also find innovators and new ways to really think about how we regain our industry and how we work with the industry, and making sure that our communities are rebuilt and the hospitality industry is, rebuilt. And so I'm thankful to his leadership on that. And so we're not just going through the motions, and we're not just getting from point A to get to point B to get to C. We're really thoughtful, very thoughtful in, how we move forward and what we do when it comes to our members and quite frankly, just our affiliates and the various different locals in the staff. It has been, I would say, one thing that I believe that has been helpful also is that typically when Unite here, when our family, when there's a tragedy or when there's a crisis like 9/11 or like the hurricanes or the fires in Alberta, Canada, or, the mass shootings or, the sniper in Las Vegas, like we've all leaned on each other for help. And so other locals were able to, assist in relief efforts, but that has not been the case through all of this, because we all are in a need, especially not having, having less than, 2% of our leadership and membership working. And so that has been challenging. So I think what our union has been able to do, which I'm very think that is extremely helpful and I'm thankful of, is that, our international put out a relief effort in solidarity for our membership. And we were able to go talk to some foundations. I never thought that happened in our union. I thought we just leaned on each other and we got, we're able to help one another. But we actually looked out and reached out for some foundations who could be helpful and wanted to be helpful. And that was very essential for us, for quite frankly, because we had areas where members still to this day have areas where my members have not received any unemployment, who healthcare has been cut off. Many folks have passed away. And so we wanted to make sure that, you know, we find a way to put those relief efforts out there to our affiliates, to our locals, so they could be of assistance to them through this time of need. So that's something that we have never done before that was different. What I wish we would do more of, or what I wish we would do, and this just brought me to a conversation that I was having with my Unite Here sister, Bridget Browning. You know, it's like sometimes we kind of reinvent the wheel. We have some great leaders in our organization that lead up these locals. They do some great things, but they just do it in their silo and their local, right? We don't get together enough to do it where we could, you know, have just one system, one way, and train everyone else and include folks in the things there, and we're gonna have to fix that, because we have locals that may not survive this at all. We have locals that may not recover from this. We have locals where employers will go out of business, and, you know, and that is extremely unfortunate when you have good people and good workers who built an industry, but to know that they may not make it through all of this is, you know, extremely challenging. So there's some discussions on how we're going to handle it, whether it's mergers or et cetera. But, you know, each local and each city has its own unique thing, and, you know, and the members they truly care about, and that's their, you know, that's who they are. And so quite frankly, what I just wish we do more of, or wish we adapt, is a way that we can do things collectively together to assist the members, and not really do things in silos as we try to rebuild our organization. And not only rebuild our organization, but also rebuild the hospitality industry. Because make no mistake about it, like, our leaders do not take for granted that folks don't have to go to a basketball game. They don't have to go to a baseball game. They don't have to go to a casino. They don't have to go to a hotel. They don't have to go to the airport unless you're traveling for work. And a lot of that is not happening. And so, you know, it's tough, but, you know, we're fighters, we're very resilient, and we're forward thinkers. And, you know, we think, quite frankly, with our members, just putting our members first, and that's how we make our decisions. And I'm sure there's more that I wanted to say that I probably missed it and probably got caught up in the moment, but thank you for the time, and I appreciate it. And again, lucky 7. 7's the best, guys.
This is a round of applause for you, Nia, and Lucky 7, but also for Jimmy Williams and Karen White, all of you. Thank you so much for sharing this. And rather than like getting too technical, let's clap away. We have a few minutes for some comments and questions that you might want to either pose to Karen, Jimmy, and Nia, or just observations that you want to say and share at this point. You can do that in the chat box, and again, Kathleen will help me with that. Or if you have something you'd like to say and you raise your hand, we will look for you to join in. Any thoughts?
The chat box is most of the recent comments were people just expressing love and care and concern for the members, but also, you know, just thinking about what you're describing, Nia, around locals, the viability of our organizations. I think there's a lot of feeling around that. I just wanted to reflect something that I felt like was a theme for all three of you is new voices and people who maybe wouldn't have had power in the org structure in the past, having new power now. So like Jimmy, that's definitely your comments about your younger staff and leaders who know how to use social media. But I feel like Nia and Karen were both talking about how do we like change our structures, because the structures we had aren't what's going to get us through that. So that feels like a really powerful thing that all of us could be reflecting on in our own organization.
Yeah. Thanks, Kathleen. And I'm also struck by the idea that there are some things that you all have done that 6 months ago, people in the organization would have said, that won't even pass the laugh test. We can't do that. And then under these extreme circumstances, like the kinds of things that you're doing in NEA, the convenings that you're doing, you know, is just really powerful. Yeah, jump in, Nia. You got to unmute your, yeah.
I got it. So on that note, Jeff, you saying that, that just reminded me, I wanted to share something with my sister, Karen, when she talked about NEA and they're doing their online venue. I want to say, Sister Karen, please don't get too comfortable for that. We welcome you back to those Unite Here hotels where our members work in.
Trust me.
So please, you guys, don't get too comfortable. Please, we welcome all of you back to our venue.
Yeah, we will not. There's nothing that will replace that in-person meeting. Trust me. I mean, people are already going through withdrawal. You know, we're not going to get our macadamia nuts from Hawaii, and we're not going to get the bourbon from Kentucky, and we're not going to, all of our friends that come and see each other. So trust me, we cannot wait to be together again. I love that you said that.
It's great.
That's John Cartwright.
Yes, John, jump in, brother.
Yeah, John Cartwright from Toronto. So it's been a great conversation. I'm really happy to you know, hook back up with old friends and be in the chat room with a couple of new friends. One of the things that this strikes me is that, you know, a theme of NLI has been about thinking generational leadership as well, and how do everybody do successor planning within the organization. And it strikes me that these difficult times are going to throw up brand new leaders, because people have no choice but to start, you know, stepping up and acting on behalf of the three speakers have talked about. And whether we have the ability as a movement to provide those tools very early on to those leaders so they're making the best possible decisions, I think is a challenge that I know I'm going to take away from this conversation. And you know, that it's not unlike folks in the 1930s who were suddenly say, oh my God, our world is, you know, dramatically changed. You know, we had craft unions were the norm. Now we've got something entirely different. You look at you know, the 5 richest corporations in the world now, none of them existed 20 years ago. And in Toronto, we just had a group organizing Fedora, you know, food delivery workers. And when they got the right to organize, the international company shut down their entire Canadian operations. So part of what the next generation of activists will be trying to figure out is how do we figure out the new organizing tools for a world that not only is impacted by COVID, but is also facing this huge disruption. On the education side, we know that the you know, quote, digital learning, that was at the root of one of the huge collective agreement battles in Ontario. A government proposed e-learning because their private buddies are all the ones that are going to provide that. And whether it's in healthcare or in any other places, the impact of the digital world that we're seeing embrace us today is going to require, you know, new and creative answers in the lessons that people learned a century and a half ago when our movement started being built, or 80 years ago during a mass organizing, or 30 years or 40 years ago when civil rights and worker rights were so crucially intertwined. I think we've got to figure this stuff out and continue to be part of a community conversation. So I just want to thank everybody for being part of this.
Great. Thank you, John. Any last comments? I have a few things that I'll share before we conclude, but anyone else have something else they want to say? If not, I just want to call for another great round of applause for the sharing from Karen and Jimmy and Nia. Just really fabulous. And let me just say a couple of things by way of conclusion. One, like we in the NLLI are struggling with how do we adapt to the reality of this current moment, and how can we be of service to our larger community of labor leaders. And so this conversation that we're having is for all of you, but it's for us too, is like figuring out what do we do that's not just how do we do what we were doing before with new technology, but what does this moment call us to do that may be different than what we were doing before? That's one thought. The second is I was really struck by Nia's observation about how your locals within your organization have come to support one another when one or another faced a crisis. But there's something about this moment that it's like it universalizes the crisis. All of your locals are faced with a crisis. And as I look at all of the leaders on the screen, this has affected all of us. And so there's kind of a universalizing of this moment of crisis that calls upon us to connect with one another across divides. You know, they may have been silos within your organization, but now it's more a broader question. Third is just as Karen White said in her presentation, that this crisis has laid bare the inequities and fundamental flaws in the way that our society and economy is organized. And these kind of crises historically create a moment where we're faced with a choice about whether we're going to go back to the pre-pandemic normal that didn't work for masses of people, or we're going to allow the billionaire class to go forward to an even more horrific dystopia that's like worse than the pre-pandemic because they're taking advantage of the crisis, or if we're going to be bold enough to have a vision of a way to reorganize our society and economy so that it really works for working people. And that speaks to kind of the movement question, which we're going to take up in the third of these webinars that will come up in 2 weeks. We will let you know about that. Also, you're going to be receiving an online evaluation of this webinar, and we would very much appreciate your feedback. It only takes 5 minutes, but we really want to listen. Like you're talking about listening to your community, and we want to listen to our community. So we invite your feedback. And then finally, you know, there are a lot of things that we bring into the NLLI community, and one is the tool of the Wheel of Change. But I want to conclude with a poem, the title of which is The Wheel of the Law, which I have framed on my wall. And it goes like this: the wheel of the law turns without pause. After rain, good weather. In the wink of an eye, the universe throws off its muddy clothes. For 10,000 miles, the landscape spreads out like a beautiful brocade. Light breezes, smiling flowers. High in the trees, amongst the sparkling leaves, all the birds sing at once. People and animals rise up reborn. What could be more natural? After sorrow comes joy. And we share the sorrow that has enveloped the lives of too many of our friends and family members, and we embrace the joy that will come as we transform this world going forward. Thank you all so much. Thank you again, Karen, Jimmy, and Nia, and we will be in touch. Take care.
Have a great day.